Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our UIKit tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can send delete requests to our API. Now, if you remember from the previous video, in the previous video we took a look at GET requests, and those are relatively simple. Today we're taking one step further into network requests by covering a type of request that is still relatively simple, but is configured slightly differently than when we need to send a simple GET request. So let's first talk about what exactly a delete request is. Well, when we think about a delete request, we think of exactly as the name implies, a kind of network request that gets sent to a server to delete some kind of object or resource. Now, delete is one of the HTTP method verbs. There's get, put, patch, post, and delete. As mentioned, we're doing delete today. Now, delete only requires an endpoint. Delete requests don't generally have a body. In fact, they never have a body. So what we have, what we're going to go and reach out to is basically the localhost 8080 API projects, delete endpoint, and then the last part of that URL is going to be the ID of the project we want to delete. So it'll be http://localhost:8080/API/projects/delete/ whatever the project ID is. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at what we have by default in our application. So right now in our application, we have basically the user interface is as follows. On the active and closed project screen, we have a text field and a button at the very top. The text field is used for entering a project name. The button is for adding that project. We'll do that in the next video. Beneath that text field and button, we will have a list of projects. So in the case of the active tab, it'll list all the projects that are active. In the closed projects tab, it'll list all the projects that are closed. Now, each cell has a couple swipe actions. We have one for toggling the status of the project, and then we have another for deleting that project. We're going to be working with the delete action today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. But the first thing we need to do is we need to actually write our network code. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our network manager. So inside of network manager, we're going to say func delete underscore project. It's going to be of type project. All right, the only other thing that we need is that this method needs to be asynchronous, and it needs to be able to throw some kind of error. All right. Now, inside of our delete method, the first thing we need to do is we need to get the URL that we want to send a request to. And so we can do this by saying guard let URL equals URL string http://localhost:/API/project/delete/ and then we'll say project.id. So this has to be the project ID. We're going to use string interpolation to make sure that we get the right thing, because we don't want to hard code this ID. All right, so now that that's complete, we can go ahead and say else. We simply want to return, because our delete method will return nothing. Next, we need to configure a URL request. Now, a URL request object will contain the various bits and bobs that we need to configure our network request beyond a normal GET request. So with this, we can configure the HTTP method. We can configure a potential HTTP body. We can set values for certain HTTP header fields and all that kind of stuff. We can do all kinds with this sort of thing. So what we're going to do, if Xcode and VoiceOver will cooperate with me. Okay, so we'll say var request equals URL request. This will take in the URL like that. Next, we want to set the HTTP method. So request.HTTP method. This is an optional string. So equals delete. Just like that. All right, so now that we have our HTTP method, we don't need to send, we don't need to set a content type. We don't need to set a body or anything like that. So we are done configuring the request. It's as simple as just setting a different HTTP method to use. Next, we need to actually send that data to the server and tell it, hey, delete this project. We can do that by saying let underscore, because we don't want the data that it gives us. We want the response, however. And this response is going to be a URL response object, and we're going to convert that to an HTTP URL response here in a second. We'll set that equal to try await URL session dot shared dot data for our URL request. Next, we need to get the HTTP URL response from our response object. And we can do that by saying it should be if let HTTP response equals response as question mark HTTP URL response. And now let's pause here for a second. Why do I need to convert our URL response object to an HTTP URL response object? Why? Well, The reason for that is because HTTP URL response is going to contain certain information that we need to check for. And that information is the status code. We need to be able to check the status code of our response, because depending on how the server is handling it, it may or may not return a favorable status code. It's not always going to cause the data method of our URL session to throw an error, right? So in order to handle any errors on the server side, to let the user know, hey, something went wrong on the server, we need to check the status code. So if it's not a 204 status code, which means no content, the no content status code basically tells us everything went well. There's nothing to report. If it's not that, then if it's not 204, then we know something went wrong. So inside of our if-let clause here, we'll say if HTTP response.status code is not equal to 204, then we know something went wrong. We will throw network error dot delete failed. So I have a case inside of network error called delete failed. Now, what is network error? Well, if we go up here to the top of our network manager file, this is simply a custom error that we can throw. It's all custom errors are enums. And all this is doing pretty much is just declaring two types of errors. There's a creation and a deletion error. There will be a patch and put error if you're going to do those. We will cover patch and post in the in the next video, but we just have two cases right now. All right. So that's our network code done. Our network code was relatively simple. So now that we have that successfully implemented, we now need to actually put this into action. Inside of our swipe action, the actual action closure, we need to do something with this. So, inside of my table view delegate, what I'm going to do is, okay, so this is probably going to need, a project. So delete we'll need a project, make it of type project. Okay. Now let's modify this swipe action here. Okay, so let's get rid of that parameter. We'll make this a trailing closure. We'll say this is going to need a we're going to need the action, the source view, and a handler. Well, not a handler. Well, yeah, a handler. In all right, so what we'll do here is we will say let project equals self dot projects at the index path dot row then we will call delete. We will pass it our project action source view, and then we'll need a handler like that. All right, so we'll say self.delete. All right, cool. Now, inside of the delete method, we are going to call our network code, as well as deleting the project from our projects array and applying a new snapshot to our diffable data source. So there are 3 separate steps to this. First thing that we need to do is surround this in a asynchronous context. So we'll put a task in here. Then we will say do catch, and inside of the do block we'll say try await network manager dot shared dot delete project. If this succeeds, we can say projects dot remove remove all where project in project dot ID so self dot projects dot remove all where $0 dot ID is equal to project dot ID. So we only want to remove this particular project. That's it, right? And finally, we need to apply snapshot. The last thing that we are going to do is we're going to call our handler. So completion handler. This is going to take in a Boolean. So we're going to pass it true because we were able to successfully complete the action. catch, now with this, ideally, what you should do is show an alert to the user to let them know, hey, something went wrong here, and then call the completion handler and pass it false to let it know that the action was not successfully completed. So inside of our catch, we will say print something went wrong when trying to... Well, actually, what we could do instead here is we can say print error dot localized description. Okay. Then we will call our completion handler and pass it false. Like that. So we can save that, and then let's run our code. All right, we have a successful build. All right, so here we are. So you can see our text field and our button and then our list of projects. Let's go into our closed projects here. In here, we have a project that we can test this on. So let's go ahead and what you can do is you can swipe on the cell and click on delete. I'm going to summon my voiceover actions menu. And we have two actions here. We can open the project and we can delete it. We'll say delete. And now our project is gone. If we go to the terminal, we can see that our server log has logged the request and it's gone. So let's rerun the application. Go back to our closed projects again. And you can see it's gone here too when we rerun it. So that pretty much does it for this video, guys, on how we can send delete network requests to a third-party API in Swift in our iOS applications. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.